Hi there. I have in the past introduced you to the condition option called Selection Historic Relative Odds, which allows you to look at the variation in odds on any one particular selection and compare it now with what it was a certain amount of time in the past, and therefore allowing you to identify if that selection has shortened in price or drifted. Now, there is a potential fundamental problem with that, and that's what I want to discuss in this video. In order to illustrate my point, let me just bring up this simple drawing tool, which will allow me to crudely draw some graphs. So imagine down the left-hand side, that represents our odds, and along here, that represents the time before the event starts. So we have odds rising this way, so that's 101 at the bottom and 1000 at the top, and the time as we come along to the right, that's getting nearer and nearer to the start of the event. So what we did in the past, we essentially had some point here and some point there, and the selection historic relative odds allows you to look at the odds at that point in time compared to the odds at that point in time. Now, you might be looking for, in this case, the odds to be shorter than they were. However, the issue comes where this gap in time gets too large. And in that intervening time between those 2 points, you may find that the odds have done that, they may have done that, or indeed, they may be all over the place. And in all of those 3 cases, you may not necessarily want to get involved in that selection, even though the odds at that point are lower than the odds at that point. What you can do, however, is take this time gap and split it into smaller chunks. And perhaps, rather than being an hour between start and finish, you split it up into 5-minute sections. Any engineer or scientist or anyone with a mathematical background will recognize that. It's simply down to sample rates. And the more samples that you have in any particular graph, the more accurate you can represent what that graph is doing. So essentially we do the same thing. We use the selection historical relative odds to sample in each of these little sections. So for each section, it's only going to compare the odds as they are now with 3 minutes ago, 4 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago, however you want to set it. And we can then use that to decide whether we want to get involved. For example, let's just take this example here again where it did that. So you can see in the first 3 sections it actually rose in odds, but from there on in it started to come in. So let's just say you set up 10 little sample sections. Ideally you would want a graph that just came down like that. So every single one of these sample sections would indicate that it has shortened in price. That would be the ideal. But in this case, you'll see that the first 3 or so haven't. So you might decide that, okay, we're going to sample it 10 times and we're only going to get involved if there's at least 8 of those samples indicates that the price has come in. So that's what we're going to do in today's demo. Let me just get out of that. Okay, so in this demonstration that I've already set up, we're going to check to see if the selection is currently shortening. So on the Conditions tab, I've set up this mechanism here where I am checking the current favourite Now that may not necessarily be a good thing to do, in the sense that in the intervening time your favourite may change position, i.e. two selections may swap. So you may want to go to Betfair row, for example, or indeed do it by name. But we'll just leave it for back odds position for the purposes of this demonstration. But you may want to play with that, as I say. So essentially what I'm saying here is selection A's back price now, so that in other words when this rule kicks in, is less than its back price. Keep in mind that selection B is the same as the selection A. So it's checking its price now compared to its price 3 minutes ago. And if it's less than, this condition will be true, and therefore this action will fire. This rule will execute. Now the rule I'm using is just a simple dummy rule, so it's not going to do anything in the market. All it's going to do is increment the number of times it has executed. And there is the next bit that you need to be aware of. You need to set this up so that it executes the number of selections or the number of samples that you want to do with the corresponding time gap. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to start this an hour before the event. It's going to execute 10 times, spaced out by 3 minutes each. Now if at any point in time that condition is not true, that item will not execute. So we need to go in and check that. So just imagine this is being set up an hour before the event. So you might want to do this on a football match, say, in preparation for the team news coming out. So what we do here is, with this rule established, we need to do another rule which is actually going to do the thing we want. So for example, back favourite if consistently shortening. So we'll set this up relative to the start time. Now what we need to do here is set this up rather than an hour before the match, set this up 30 minutes before the match. So we're giving the first rule the necessary amount of time it needs to run through its 10 iterations. It only needs to execute once, and what we need to do is, let's just say, back the favourite. So that's going to be that one. Current best back odds, whatever amount of money that you want. We won't bother doing a filler kill, and we won't do a keep of persistence. So that's the thing that's going to happen, but only if the rule number of executions for that rule there is greater than or equal to, let's say, 7 out of 10. And that's when this bet will fire. That's indicating that it's reasonably strong and consistent in coming in price over that half-hour period. Okay, so you're essentially using this as a controlling mechanism to indicate if the conditions are right for this bet to be placed. And given that we're entering or potentially entering the market 30 minutes before the event, you may actually want to put a stop option on that. And the reason for doing that is, so we might want to stop that, and let's just say relative to start time, and put that as 31 minutes before. Sorry, that should be 29 minutes before, beg your pardon. So that's going to stop, and the reason for that is this thing here will still try to loop round 10 times, and if at one point in time that condition is not true, it simply doesn't increment, but it will carry on incrementing each time that condition becomes true. So essentially, you either have to put a stop on this one to say, right, stop 30 minutes out, or you can use that one to prevent it from putting the bet in if that count reaches 7. Either or will work, doesn't matter. Okay, so that's it. The two important things there is to set apart and execute loop to tell it to do 10 times. And of course, you can do it more than that. Of course, you can. So you narrow down the sample window, so you increase the sample rate. And then based on the amount of times that has shown to be true or how many times it's looped around, you can then indicate whether you wish to get involved in that particular selection. Okay, thanks for watching.